everybody. Welcome back. Thanks again for joining us. I am so excited about season 2. I know this is the third testimony that we've had the opportunity to share. So I hope you're enjoying them. Today we have a very special guest on the show, someone I actually grew up with, Tyler Patterson. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Tyler, can you just kind of share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Tyler. I'm 27. I've been born and raised here my entire life. I grew up in Blossom. And I've got my wife, Kelsey, and I, we've been married for about 6 years. We've got 2 sons, Brentley, who's 6, Paxton, who's 2. And we're super excited to be here.
Awesome. Tyler has a lot of cool things going on in his life. And it's been cool for me to have the opportunity to know you growing up and then see all God's doing in your life now. So with the testimony, we're just going to jump into it. And I know you guys are excited to hear. So let's just start, Tyler, with before you knew Christ.
So before I knew Christ, I kind of grew up just like every other kid. Growing up in Blossom, it's a small town. Everybody kind of knows everybody. Lots of agricultural roots, small business owners, things like that. And it's kind of the place that really helped shape me into the person I am. And growing up, I attended church. We were part of youth groups, things like that, but I was never really committed to that relationship with God, right? I went to church on Sundays because you went to church on Sundays,
Mm-hmm.
right? We would go to church on Wednesdays because you went to church on Wednesdays. And the biggest part I would think of my growing up life that had a negative effect on me was the fact that my father wasn't around.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the youth is something I'm so passionate about. I have a heart for, because on children that takes a toll, but especially on boys that takes a huge toll, right? So my life being super involved in sports, things like that, you see other dads are the baseball coaches, the basketball coaches, the football coaches. You see your friends going hunting, things like that. And so that was, still probably is the hardest part of when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
It's still pretty hard today because there's a lot of those things that I don't get to share with that person, right? So growing up, that was the hardest part, right? And I kept that at bay for a long time. It bothered me when I was younger, but it didn't really bother me until I became a teenager. When I became a teenager, I had kind of just dealt with it on my own. I didn't take the problem to God. I didn't take the problem to friends or even my mother, really. Because for the most part, I was lucky enough that most of the friends we grew up with, their dads were pretty good father figures as far as, Garrett and Mason and all those kids we grew up with. So for the most part, I was able to keep it at bay until, probably getting into high school. And I remember we were maybe in junior high, 8th grade, maybe going into freshman. And it was Father's Day and it all just kind of blew up, right? My mother caught the blunt end of it. Just a big blow up, that eventually led to me sitting down at a young age, writing a letter to my father and figuring out how to get it there. And because of that,
So you did not know your father?
no,
Okay.
I've never met my biological father.
Okay. So you're writing a letter.
Yep. I knew who he was.
Mm-hmm.
We had pictures of him from, as far as being there when I was born, things like that. But him and my mother had me at a young age, right? I was 5 when my mom graduated high school. So she had me very young.
Mm-hmm.
I know that he's been incarcerated for my whole life.
Okay.
Just due to several things as far as, because you get curious and you dig and you find out, right? And just things as far as drugs and alcohol and weapons and gang violence and things like that. And so, I sat down, I wrote a letter, I figured out how to get it there, and that was probably 15 years ago, and I've never heard back. But that took just being able to write that letter and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to write anything ugly. Whether you care or not, whether you know who I am or not, I forgive you. Because I realized that my relationship with God could not grow until I got that kind of hate is what it was, until I got that out of my heart. Because I grew up in a single parent household, 3 kids. My mother did everything she could, but we struggled a lot. But I think it made all of us stronger individuals as far as that. But I went to some pretty dark places as far as when I held that in and I've got it in my book. And matter of fact, my wife didn't even know until we were kind of going through the introduction. And, I told her, I said, there were times I didn't want to be here anymore, but I had a good enough support system to help kind of pull me out of that. So, if you fast forward, later through high school, kind of right when we got out of school, I really kind of dug into, my relationship with the Lord. I really dug into church. We were a part of the Cowboy Church at the camp. We had been there for, we went there for probably 10 years. And once again, I got on the track of, in my mind, I was super dug in, but I was still kind of, green, kind of like a surface Christian. I every once in a while I would still say things that I knew I wasn't supposed to say. I would think things that I shouldn't think. I would, see that person every once in a while and tell my wife, I can't stand that person. I'm like, well, I knew I shouldn't be acting that way, right? And so it wasn't until me and Kelsey were about to get married, once again, and in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm a Christian. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing as a Christian. And it wasn't until we were fixing to get married, and she told me pretty bluntly. She said, if we're gonna get married, and we're gonna have children, you're going to have a real relationship with God. And that was kind of like stop you in your tracks moment, as far as the beginning of me really digging into my relationship with Christ, mainly because, and like a lot of new Christians, you go into a church and you see these people who are so well put together, and the devil instantly starts telling you, right, you don't come from the right family, you don't have enough money, you don't dress the right way, you don't do enough community service, things like that. And so, when I got to that point where my wife basically told me, my future wife, if I'm going to be your wife, this is how it's going to be. I was just kind of a surface Christian, I really liked the nice, lovey parts of the Bible. I kind of skipped over the ones that made me feel conviction.
So this is, you were saved when you were a child, but this is when you're coming to like, okay, I'm gonna stop drinking the milk from the bottle.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was saved at a church camp when I was about 12. I grew up in the First Baptist Church of Blossom. And I spent most of my childhood there, and when I was about 12 or 13, probably 12 or 13, we were at a church camp. I got saved. We come home, we did the baptism, things like that. And even then, I remember before I got baptized, our pastor, who's still the pastor there, he made me sit down and talk to him a few times. He he really cared about, okay, I want to make sure that you understand what you're doing and what this means, which is something we don't see a lot of anymore, right? A lot of times it's an emotional thing where there's 30 people getting baptized at the same time, and it's just kind of running them through. But yeah, I had been baptized through that whole time, even the rough spell of all the emotions kind of coming to a head with my father. But like you said, yeah, I was just drinking milk from the bottle. I was, I'm nice and put together on Wednesdays and Sundays. Who cares what I do every other day of the week? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't long. I mean, it didn't take us long to grow up. When you have kids young and you get married young, you grow up pretty quick as far as adult responsibility and kind of getting away from the partying and things like that. But it wasn't until I was probably 20 or 21 before we got married. And Kelsey kind of laid it out pretty bluntly. She wasn't ugly about it. It was just, this is, I was raised in a different type of family you are, but this is the type of family that we're going to have. And I tell people that all the time. I'm very grateful that we had that conversation. And when we started really digging in and really focusing on God being a part of our marriage, a part of our family, things took a turn for, dramatically better times as far as just getting along. I mean, everything, getting along, your work situation, your financial situation, just your home. Whenever we kind of focused on putting God there, it was a smoother ride, right? But I don't say that lightly because, as a Christian, life is still extremely hard. You're tested daily.
But there's a joy that comes
absolutely
from diving in and eating the meat, right? That Paul tells us, stop drinking the bottle. So now though, you're in a place of you are diving in. God is first in your marriage. And now let's talk about all the things that from there, we're at like 21, right? Age 21. And we're not far from 21 now.
We're getting pretty close to 30.
We're a little farther than I would like.
So, I mean, as far as from that point on, believe it or not, it might have only been a year later.
Okay.
And I told my wife, I don't remember what we were doing. It was weird. We were driving or something. It was just us. And I was like, and I told her, I said, I feel like God's calling me into the ministry. And she kind of, like, okay, let's just get over this phase real quick. And I was like, okay, maybe not, maybe it's just one of those type of emotional highs or whatever. And then you fast forward another year and a half, 2 years, and I'm like, hey, this isn't going away. And not necessarily as far as the feeling, but friends our age having marriage problems, and they're calling and talking to me, just the opportunities that kept being placed in front of me. And as a Christian, opportunities are placed in front of us to serve every day, right? That's what we're supposed to do. I try not to get too caught up in whether it's in a pulpit or in a Sunday school class, and I try to just slow things down and take those opportunities. Now, I thoroughly enjoy being in a pulpit or being in a Sunday school class, but even at work, a job like mine where you interact with the public daily, I would say that at least once a day, me and one of my customers talk about God, whether they're involved in the ministry, whether they don't believe, whether we have a mutual belief. And so God's just, I was being placed in these positions where I kept having opportunities. And so a really, really good friend of mine and one who's basically been around me since me and Kelsey got married, my pastor now, Wade White, I reached out to him and I said, hey, look, I know that we go to the same church. I'm involved in the youth, but this is what I'm feeling and I kind of need some guidance. And so we talked through it. My wife's uncle, Phil, he's been the youth pastor at Southside Baptist Church for a long time. I reached out to him. I had some very good resources as far as like Dwayne Hamill, Wade White, Phil Spann, Mike Fortenberry, just some people who I'd known in the past who, were very strong influences and still are in the way that I kind of like to learn, like to teach. And so I reached out to all them people, and me and Kelsey sat down and talked, and I said, look, I'm not saying that I'm supposed to go into full-time ministry because I don't feel that yet. And I know that we're supposed to serve other people regardless of our position. I said, but I'm at the point where I feel my position is teaching. Not solely teaching, because we're always learning, right? But I love the opportunity to teach, and God keeps providing me with those opportunities. And so I, when we sat down and talked, I just said, look, I'm using this kind of as confirmation. When God puts the opportunity there, we're going to go. I'm not going to push for it. I'm not going to call a bunch of random churches and, but if somebody needs me and they call me, I'm going to use that opportunity. And there's been good ones and bad ones. The first time I stood in a pulpit on a Sunday morning and preached, I was so nervous that I thought I was going to pass out.
I feel that.
And as you kind of grow in that, you learn. Everybody's going to tell you did good after the service. Everybody's going to wait till they're in the car to tell you did, to say you did bad. But it was, every time I would go preach, I would be super nervous before, super nervous throughout. And then at the end, we'd get in the car and I'm like, dang it, I missed that point. I missed that point. I missed that point.
Beating yourself up.
And my wife's like, nobody knows that you missed them but you. And so in that probably 4-year span, it was a huge whirlwind of, okay, now I'm going to be super serious about my relationship with God and the way that I raise my children and the way that, we act and we still mess up. You're still going to catch me get mad. Every once in a while I still say something and I'm like, I shouldn't have said that. But that's just part of the growth. But in that 4 years, we went from, okay, you're going to be serious if we're going to get married, to, I think I'm being called into the ministry, to I'm absolutely being called into the ministry, and to now it's a huge part of our lives as far as the opportunities. And so it's been a big adjustment. But like you said, there's a real joy to it,
Let's talk about some of the opportunities now that you've had. So you mentioned a book.
Yep. Earlier. So I've been, I started in probably 2019, and I was really hot and heavy on it for a while, 6 to 8 months. I was writing every day. I was deleting stuff every day. I was sending stuff to people every day, and so I started writing a book, and the title of the book is Fathers Like Our Father. And obviously a huge part of it is talking about how my life was affected growing up without my father, how every children's life is, or every child's life is affected, in a single parent household, especially one without a male figure. And then it's kind of a testimony. It talks about how I got to that point. I no longer wanted to be here. Sending the letter to my dad, and then the turn that, that Jesus made in my life. And it's just kind of, I've only been a father for 7 years, but it's just bits and pieces of things that I've learned from my life, that I've learned since we've had kids, and that I'm hoping to pass on just to one person,
When will this book be available? Do you have any idea? So
I'm hoping everything will be done by the end of this year.
Awesome.
But I said that last year.
Okay.
A lot of it's just being super nitpicky, right? I'm going back, I'm changing things, and then I won't touch it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'm like, oh, I forgot, and I'll go back and I add it, and that messes something up over here. And I'm not expecting it to be some huge global success, right? I expect it to be something that we give copies of to people here local. And if it can just help one person, right?
I feel like your story, Tyler, can help so many people, though.
Well, and like even there was a group here in Paris, and I honestly don't remember the name, but they reached out to me, and it's like, hey, would you like to come talk to a group of dads about why they're so important to their children? And I'm like, absolutely. You know, it's kind of like you're harping on the same thing over and over, but that's a huge part of my life. And even I would say after my relationship with God really kind of, I dug into it, probably the first 2 years of our oldest son's life, I held myself to the standard of being a good father because I did the things that mine didn't. But I was still failing a little bit as far as what God's word says that I should do as a father. So, I want to say it was probably my first Father's Day. We went to church with my in-laws at a small church in Johntown, kind of over by Pagoda. And of course, he's harping on dads. And we got in the car and I told Kelsey, I was like, I'm a terrible dad. And she's like, no, of course you're a great dad. I'm like, I don't do anything that this says I should do, right? I looked at it as I showed up, I take you to ball practice, I give you a whooping when you need it, I help do the dishes, things like that. And so
you were comparing yourself
to my father,
your dad, and not a biblical perspective.
And to me, I was a huge success because of that, right? I had a good job, we had a house, things like that. But as I, dug into my relationship with God, it's so much more than that, right? So when me and Kelsey first got married, the thing I wanted to do the most is I wanted to start a business and I wanted to be able to leave it to my kids. And we tried that multiple times and I failed multiple times and it was frustrating. I'm like, I want to leave them something. And I don't remember who it was. I went to a conference type deal. And the pastor was talking about dads, the speaker, and he said, the greatest thing you can leave your children is a foundation in Christ. And so that was also kind of a big turning point as far as as far as worldly things, it's not going to last. So, we're going to try to set our kids on a good foundation. It starts with a good foundation, and let them grow from there.
And there is an opportunity for anyone listening coming up to take their children to a place that gives a good foundation. Can you kind of share about that?
Yep. So in August, we're going to have a youth conference, August 3rd and 4th, and it's going to be at the Love Civic Center. We've got some really cool things going. We've got a good group of people. You're helping. And I believe that, honestly, kind of what we were preparing for 100 kids is going to turn into a lot more.
It's a city-wide event, right?
Countywide, Lamar County. I know there's some people that are going to come from Wood County, some people from Hopkins County. It's non-denominational. It's just a place to get kids and get them exposed, right? There's going to be a lot of youth groups there and a lot of local churches, but there's going to be kids there, whether they're brought by a friend or whether their parents bring them. And it's going to be a place for them to get exposed, right? And I'm super big on statistics. And I pulled some statistics on the ages that Americans say they become a Christian, that they fully believe that Jesus is the Son of God, he is the Savior of the world. And, the statistics go up to age 30, and it says that ages 0 to 4 is less than 1%. 15 to 30 is 10%, 30 and plus is 4%, but that age group between the ages of 4 and 14 is where 85% of Americans say that they became a Christian.
Wow.
So in the years past, there's been things here for the youth to do as far as that, but it's been a long time. And so I'm hoping that this event is, whether 10 kids show up or whether 200 kids show up, I'm hoping that we can get kids here, whether they've been exposed to the gospel or not, and we can kind of help them dig into that. And I decided to call it the New Beginnings youth conference, because hopefully, number one, it's a new beginning for something that can be annual. It's a new beginning for something in our county for kids, all the way from high school down to junior high, some of your older elementary kids, to come to a place where they can get some food, have a little bit of fun, listen to music, but they can listen to a speaker who specializes in teaching the gospel to their age group. We're going to have Steve Payson come down. He's from the P230 Foundation. He's been all over the world. He's spent probably the last 25 years specializing in traveling the world, teaching youth, young adults, kind of college all the way down to elementary. And he's been to Paris before. He used to do the crusades that came to the Paris High football field. And it was another thing where I kind of felt led that this is, what God was leading me to. I had been thinking about putting on an event. I didn't really know the logistics of it, and we're still learning the logistics of it as far as, what we need. And I brought it up to Kelsey's Uncle Phil. And he actually said, well, I just got off the phone. I talked to Steve Payson, and he was saying he would love for an opportunity to come back and visit Paris. So we got in touch, automatic yes. I would love to. I love coming to Paris. We've got some local musicians coming, and my hope for it and my heart for it is that we get kids here, we get them exposed. We have people to talk them through the things they need to be talked through, and that we can turn it into an event that happens every year.
Yeah. So if you're listening, this event is happening next week. So this is a little different. We are videoing this a little early, but when this is released, when you're listening, this event is happening the following week, next week. So, if you're a youth, contact your youth leader, tell your parent. I'm sure your youth leader probably already knows because we sent out.
Yeah, we've sent out lots of flyers. I've sent out lots of emails. There's ads in the Red River Valley Baptist Association. We've kind of done everything that we can to get it going. Yeah.
So make a mental note next week to come to the Civic Center, August the 3rd and 4th.
5:30.
At 5:30, there's food provided, fun, music, most of all the gospel. And we hope to see you there.
Yeah. Yep.
So Tyler, I just want to ask you real quick as we wrap up, thank you for sharing your testimony. So encouraging to me, and I know so many people. But if somebody's listening and they too grew up without a dad, and maybe they're not at a place right now where they feel encouraged or free from bitterness, what can you kind of tell that person who's still struggling?
That probably that letting go of that bitterness is going to be the hardest thing. But as soon as you do, it's a huge weight off your shoulders, right? That your father not being around, probably your mother. I wasn't in that situation, but as far as my father, it put a lot of weight on my shoulders that really wasn't my weight. Just as far as, the weight it puts on your heart, it kind of hardens your heart, right? And when you're younger, you don't really, notice it, but it's just kind of normal, right? But like I said, when I got to that 13, 14, range, I really wanted to know why. Was it me? Was it my mom? Was it my grandparents? Was it just that, they were an irresponsible person? Because it takes a toll. The statistics on that are super, super high as well, just as far as, and I struggled with that, right? I struggled with, I'm just going to be a statistic, and it's going to be, and am I going to end up in prison like my father? Am I going to be a drug addict? Am I going to be an abuser? It says here, I pulled statistics, and it says that 25% of children in America live in homes without a father present, and that's over 18 million kids.
Wow.
Fatherless homes account for 63% of youth suicide, 90% of homelessness and runaway youth, 85% of all behavioral disorders, 71% of high school dropouts, 71% of imprisonment, and 75% of sexual abuse. And it also puts them in a 28% chance that they're going to end up in poverty. And so I kind of float both sides of that, right? I really vouch for the kid, whether they're young or older. But I vouch for the father too, as far as we've gotten in the habit of kind of raising weak Christians. And it's, if you're a father, just like me, I tell myself every day I do things wrong, and I know that I need to step up, because I've got 3 people that God's word says you need to lead correctly. And the best part of that is kind of getting to see your kids grow up in a godly home, right? My oldest is fixing to turn 7. Super cool. He's getting to the point where he's starting to ask questions, right? Yeah. He, this is what I was taught in children's church. Can you teach me more? And so that's a super neat opportunity. And God's blessed me with the ability that cycle ended with one generation. It didn't keep going.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a great point to even end the podcast on, is if you're listening and you may be at a place where you feel defeated, maybe you didn't grow up in a great home. Tyler is an example that you don't have to stay in that place, and that God can use you, desires to use you, can use you. And again, thank you so much for coming and sharing that testimony. I'm so encouraged. The reason we decided to share testimonies of people, this will be the 3rd one, is because everyday theologian is not just about knowing information. When we know the Bible and learn the Bible, the information about God becomes life transformation. And Tyler's an example of understanding the Bible and meeting Christ, and that resulting in life transformation. So thank you again. Thank you guys for joining us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave a comment, share this podcast with your friends, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.